So thank you so much, everyone, for joining and welcome. I'm really excited to be here, and I appreciate you all being interested in what I have to share with you today. My session today is focusing on feedback, and specifically, we'll look at how to build a culture that fuels performance through feedback. My name is Caitlin Collins. I'm an organizational psychologist and a principal implementation consultant at Betterworks. My career has been focused on building performance enablement programs for global organizations. I work primarily with FTSE and Fortune 100 companies, but also all of the variations from small to large and in between. For a number of years, I also spent working or volunteering as a trauma specialist, which I admittedly will tell you has been an experience that's been the biggest influence on my work. I take a very people-centric approach to help foster environments that respond to stress, trauma, neurodiversity, and change so that people not only feel fulfilled by their work, but it's a positive experience that carries home to their families and their communities. During the session today, I'll be talking through the difficulty with feedback and explore a bit about why it's scary and why it's challenging, or how it can be challenging. But I believe that all of you have your own perceptions about why it's difficult for yourself or within your organizations or people that you work with. But I think there's some information that's really worth exploring as far as that goes. Then we're going to talk about what to do about it. How do we create a positive and valuable program? We'll then cover how to improve our feedback skills, some key takeaways, and close with plenty of time for Q&A. I'm anticipating, as I'm watching the numbers grow here, that we'll have a good-sized group today. So as I move through the presentations, please feel free to chat your questions. I have a colleague of mine that is also on the line that'll help ensure that I cover all your questions and I don't miss anything. But I do want to make sure that as anything comes up, if we want to spend a little bit more time on it, we'll have plenty of time at the end to be able to address that. To get us started, I will acknowledge that when it comes to the topic of feedback, there is a ton of information in this world about it, and books upon books about feedback that'll give you lots of different perspectives. But even so, I personally always appreciate a really good book recommendation. And so what I want to share with you is one that I recommend called Thanks for the Feedback. I do think it's one of the more powerful ones that really breaks down how do we give feedback well. On top of that, or how do we receive feedback well, but on top of that, I also want to explore how we give it well as well. I'm going to start our session with a quote from the book, which I think is a little bit funny. And the quote reads, "Before you tell me how to do it better, before you lay out your big plans for changing, fixing, or improving me, before you teach me how to pick myself up and dust myself off so that I can be shiny and successful, know this. I have heard it before. I have been graded, rated, and ranked, coached, screened, and scored. I've been picked first, picked last, and not picked at all. And all of that was just in kindergarten." I find this quote, even though it's a bit kitschy, I think it's very cute, but I find this quote to be a good representation about a concept of feedback, and that we all receive feedback throughout all of our lives, whether it's spoken or unspoken. Feedback is how we learn behaviors, social norms, how we fit in with groups of people, how we learn how to succeed, and it also translates into how we feel about ourselves. My focal point on feedback is that it really is and can be a gift that we give someone. And it's, I think, a really good way to look at it on the reverse side, even if the concept is a little bit scary. But at times, even though it can be a powerful gift, at times it's a hard gift to give, and it also can be a really hard gift to receive. So in exploring how to give and receive that feedback, we first need to look at what makes giving feedback and having difficult conversations so hard for us. So I'm going to lay out one example, a little bit dramatic and simplified, but hopefully it illustrates my point in that if we are home and I'm gonna knock on wood that this never happens to anybody or happens again to anybody, but when we're home and if the house is on fire and everyone's asleep, it's not a difficult choice for us to make to run around, wake everyone up, yell, grab the dog, grab the pets, grab the photos, and get out of the house. If all we want is to achieve one thing in this scenario, which is to protect everyone's safety and get up and get out, that's not a difficult decision to make. It's direct and it's really obvious what we should do. But feedback becomes difficult when we want more than one thing, or at least two things. When we want someone to change and we want them to like it. When we want someone to stop doing something and we want them to still value us or like us in return. When we want someone to change a behavior and we want them to still be our friend. When we want to express our feelings or why our toes were stepped on or why our feelings were hurt, and we want them to still embrace it without feeling defensive. When as managers or leaders or coworkers, we want employees to change their impact, change their output, but we also want them to like and respect us. When there is more than one thing that we're trying to achieve in a conversation, then it becomes much more difficult because we magnify the level of importance for the one that means the most to us. And oftentimes it's the one that is the hardest, that we perceive to be the hardest. And so we either stumble through it or we avoid the conversation altogether. If we can recognize that feedback is difficult to give, then we also have to recognize that it's hard for us to receive it. It is natural for all of us to protect an image that the world sees of us, especially at work. We want to be able to protect our safety and our security at work, which foundationally means keeping our jobs, ensuring the trajectory of our growth or the timeline of our promotions. And therefore, we want and we need to be able to protect how our performance is viewed. And we want to be seen as doing a great job, and we don't necessarily want to be vulnerable and highlighting our shortcomings. So when feedback threatens that image, when it knocks down what we worked on so hard to build or so hard to put out into the world, we start to feel threatened, and we either fight it or we flight away from it. So when we experience this fight or flight mode, we are able to recognize in it 3 different types of triggers in how we receive difficult feedback. And this is feedback besides, you're amazing. And those triggers are truth, relationship, and identity. When we experience a truth trigger, we tell ourselves in our own internal voices, we tell ourselves the feedback that you're giving me makes no sense. It doesn't have any credibility. I don't understand or I don't agree with what you're saying. So I'm going to walk away from this. I'm going to flight away from this conversation and dismiss what you're saying. The thing about all of these triggers is that they really are blind spots, and we shouldn't dismiss feedback so readily because that feedback is the giver's truth on what they are perceiving from you. Instead, as the receiver of feedback, we need to be able to understand and ask for clarification about what do they mean? What are they trying to get across and explain to us? Maybe the feedback, maybe the facts and what they're saying is incorrect, but I will tell you that people respond to what you project out into the world. So think about the difference in how people will respond to you when you smile at them or when you're frowning and you're really grumpy. And maybe you're not just seeing in these moments, maybe it's possible that you're not seeing what it is that the other person is trying to tell you. The next trigger is the relationship trigger, and this is entirely based on how we feel about the other person we're communicating with. If for whatever reason we don't like that person, maybe we don't trust them, maybe we have a cantankerous relationship with them and it's difficult to relate, whatever the case is, even if we feel like they're out to get us, whatever that unharmonious part of that relationship might be, we will never hear what they have to say because it has to do with them and not what they're trying to tell us. For this trigger, it's important for us to let our defenses down and untangle what is being said from who is saying this. And I know that it's really difficult, but it's important to understand and learn how not to have a knee-jerk reaction or respond immediately when we are recognizing that we are in a situation like this. Instead, what we need to do is be able to digest information, because even if their feedback is objective, our emotional response gets triggered and we don't absorb or listen to what they're telling us. And we need to get to a place where we're able to do that. If it's possible to do, I think a good recommendation is to mend fences and bridge a gap in a relationship so it's not very toxic at work, so that doesn't happen, or even in our personal lives. I work a lot with kids or my own family members on a lot of this, so it doesn't have to just apply at work. But being able to find some common ground. So as much as possible in situations like this, ask clarifying questions. And if you're having trouble trying to absorb it, it's a good way to say, can you share with me an example of what you mean? Can you tell me what you mean by X, Y, and Z, what someone's trying to explain? The more we are able to find objectivity in the feedback, the more we can start to remove the layers of emotion that's happening. The third trigger is the identity trigger, and this trigger has everything to do with us. The feedback that we could be getting could be fine. The giver could be somebody we have a wonderful relationship with, or at least it's not toxic. But our sense of self starts to feel attacked. It would be, in a scenario like that, would be something wherein if I ask all of you for feedback, and I've done this for my whole organization, it's a bit scary, but I will do that. If I ask all of you to provide me feedback on this session, and let's say none of you, I'm knocking on wood on this one too. Let's say none of you give me positive feedback, and it's all, a way to be able to improve what I've done or what your perception or your takeaway was. In that moment, my reaction I might feel like, oh my gosh, I've failed. I'm terrible at my job. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. Maybe, my career could be over. And I know it's very dramatic, but I know we've all felt some level of anxiety in situations like this. So in one way or another, we're feeling like this is a personal assault or a personal affront to who we are as people. And we have to remember, what we produce, what we work on, is not who we are. It is not a representation of who we are as people. It is not a representation of who we are as employees. This trigger is one of the hardest ones to overcome, mostly because there's so much of our amygdala that's wrapped up in this, and our own sense of self, our own perception of who we are, of our ego. All of this gets processed from our brain. So there's a lot more emotional context to this. But to overcome this, we first need to be able to recognize that this is a trigger in some way, but we need to start stretching the neuroplasticity of our brain. So all of this mindfulness really helps on how we process information. But we need to work on assuming positive intent. Instead of me feeling terrible about myself if I receive all not so positive feedback, and you say, okay, what is it that I want to walk away from? What would be the thing I take away from so that next time I can do better? When we give feedback to other people, well, whether we know it or not, sometimes we will. It might be easily seen, but sometimes we might not. And if there's somebody that we're giving feedback to and they are triggered in this way, the more we can try and stay in the present moment with them and be very prescriptive. So it's not just to say, Caitlin, your presentation was terrible. It would be, here's where the content didn't land for me, or where I lost some disengagement, or where the story didn't flow. It would be something where, and if I was giving myself feedback, I would be in that moment with myself to be really specific about what it is that might not have landed so well. And that helps the other person to digest it more easily. So we understand, I think to this point, I think I've made a case for the problem of feedback. And if it's something that is difficult and takes practice, what would be the purpose of even doing it at all? And I want to explore that with you a bit on really the value that it can bring and why I see it as a gift. But what we want to look at, even if we're giving indirect or direct feedback, there are, just as there's tons of books and literature, there are tons of studies that show how valuable good feedback can be. And I've worked with many organizations in many markets, various sizes, and there isn't an organization that I haven't worked with yet that hasn't asked me, gosh, how do we do this better? And there could be a lot of implications for that, especially when we're talking about a global implication. Cultures interact with and receive feedback very differently than some other countries or regions. So there's a lot to be mindful of when we're talking about how do we make this really work well for everyone within our organizations. But in workplaces where managers don't engage in feedback, or even peers for that matter, employee engagement rates limp in at around 29%. But on the opposite side of that, when feedback is regularly exchanged with employees, engagement starts to jump to 79%. So I'm going to broaden the scope for a minute. So no feedback bad, good feedback good, good feedback good. So if we broaden the scope of this, I want to start to connect this to a bigger picture. 77% of HR executives believe that performance reviews are not an accurate representation of employee performance. And I'm willing to bet that's even a higher percentage outside of HR executives when we're talking about employee population. But why do I even reference the statistic at all? Well, because feedback and performance are nearly synonymous with each other at most organizations. Most organizations push feedback, mostly 360s, with their annual performance reviews once a year. And I've known this from other feedback from people that this ultimately becomes a really big challenge, or the bane of our existence during the holiday season, when we've got upwards of maybe 12, 20 feedbacks to write, performance reviews to write, and we're trying to close out the quarter and close out the year. And aside from that, the output of this process is pretty generally seen as useless by everyone that's involved. In my experience, nearly every organization recognizes this as a problem, and I haven't met one yet. So if you happen to buck my scenario, I would love for you to tell me. But I haven't met an organization yet who says that their annual performance reviews are amazing, including the feedback portion when we're asking all of our 360 questions. You throw in a big list of competencies and make it even bigger, and it becomes even more challenging for people. So not doing annual performance reviews and leaning into continuous feedback has become the new path forward. Deloitte did a study on their own organization that showed that they were spending nearly 2 million hours each year assigning numerical ratings to each employee via feedback, via scheduled 360s. And the data revealed how ratings tend to say, for them, the ratings tended to say more about the perceptions of the person giving feedback than they did about the actual performance of the person receiving the evaluation or receiving the feedback. And we know that to be true in many different ways, but primary reasons are that our memories fail us. We are not able to recall from the past year and really give a full representation in one moment how someone performed throughout a whole year. And also, we're biased. If we wait that long to be able to give people feedback and to be able to do those ratings, then it becomes our perception and our emotion about them as people. Accenture found the same information and implemented a much more fluid system in which employees received real-time feedback from their peers, from their managers, from their team leaders on projects on an ongoing basis. CEB found that the average manager spends more than 200 hours a year on activities related to performance reviews. And that includes sitting through training sessions, filling out evaluation forms. When you add up all of these hours plus the cost of a management technology, CEB estimates that a company that's about 10,000 employees roughly spends about $35 million a year to conduct reviews. I know, it feels so crazy. That's so much money. And so we can see a trend in the world of work, in the market of work across organizations, where in the last year to 2 years, about 6% of Fortune 500 companies have also transformed their own feedback and performance review process. That percentage really increases over the last 2 years when we are talking about non-Fortune 500 organizations, and smaller businesses are starting to take on this approach. So what do we do about it? In making the case that annual performance reviews don't work, hopefully we're all on the same page with that, but if not, I'd love to hear about it. Not being engaged with, we recognize that like not being engaged with our employees is not effective in any means or way of thinking about it. And that's because performance is not episodic. It is continuous. We show up day after day performing, even if some days we have good days and some other days we have good days and some days we have really bad days. Sorry, however I said that. But even so, we need to be able to look at performance differently and understanding how people show up for work. And not for nothing, I was thinking about this last night when I was, part of this was last night when I was making sure I had all my ducks in a row. And I'm thinking to myself for another session that these concepts are really challenging and unraveling 80 years of tradition with an annual performance review approach. So I think it's probably time that we did something new. There are 4 parts to a continuous performance enablement process. And the first one is identifying short-term goals. Are we focused, or are our employees focused on the right things at the right time? By supporting our employees to be able to create shorter term goals, it enables them to stay focused and prioritize what is important right now. What do we need to make sure that we accomplish today to stay on track with their development or enable contribution to larger organizational strategies? As well as enables, that's just for one person, the whole of the organization to start to execute on strategy more efficiently. The second part is feedback. So I admittedly have said that I see feedback as tremendously valuable. And when feedback is done well in real time, it becomes a tool that's meaningful for us to actually take action on. The third element is coaching or having conversations. So as leaders, as managers, having conversations with our employees to check in on how they're doing, how they're feeling, and help better guide them on the path to the direction that they want to go in. The fourth part then is recognition. And part of recognition is acknowledging that in our own ways, however we feel, however we absorb this, that we need to feel seen, we need to feel valued. For some people, that might not be seen by the whole organization, and maybe it's just your manager. Some people love to be in the spotlight, and that can be an organizational to be seen. But whatever that means for people, we want to know that what we're doing has meaning and value, and we're doing a good job, and we feel motivated to keep going. And recognition, I think, is more than just saying thank you. It's more than saying you did a great job yesterday on this project you were working on, or how you handled that customer. There's value in our recognition being really specific about why we're saying thank you. Because when we, who are receiving recognition, when we receive reinforcement on what we're doing well, we're more likely to repeat those same behaviors. When we dig into feedback specifically, so what does that process look like? Feedback is moments that help us close a gap between where we are today and where we want to be tomorrow. There are studies that show how different types of feedback can have a positive as well as a negative impact on ourselves, or on the outputs, or on what we're trying to achieve. And the most effective types of feedback provide cues or reinforcement and relate to goals that we own. So if a goal that I have, and just for the sake of this session, if the goal that I have is to give a TED Talk one day, receiving feedback, me being able to receive feedback that's specific, that will help me improve in sessions such as this, will help me change certain behaviors, help me change my approach so that I can get to that TED Talk stage. Lots of studies have found strong correlations to self-determination theory, wherein feedback that relates to extrinsic rewards have more of a negative consequence or aren't as powerful, and feedback that relates intrinsically or to intrinsic rewards are much more positive. The most powerful study that I have read in addressing the effects of various types of feedback, and this was written by Kluger and Denisi, shows the power of feedback is related to performance on goals, just as I had mentioned earlier. When goals are challenging, but the task complexity is low, which means when we have a goal that we want to achieve that's quite lofty and might stretch us a bit, but we have identified smaller steps forward in order to get there, so certain milestones along the way. When we receive feedback on those milestones or on those steps, we are more likely to improve our performance. And the reason is because we care about it. We're invested in it. Achieving that goal is something that means something to us. So why wouldn't we want to receive help in order to get there? So for feedback to be powerful and for it to improve performance for people, we can view it in 3 different ways. And the first way is to understand where are employees going. When people are committed or enrolled to attaining a goal, they are likely to seek and receive feedback to those milestones, to those steps about achieving that goal. What are they committed to? What do they want to achieve? What should they be doing in order to achieve it? And this all comes into elements where we need to be good coaches as managers and leaders. The second construct is how are they going? Feedback is effective when it consists of information about progress. How are they doing? What should they be doing differently next time? How do they meet expectations? Not everyone is going to take much value out of a response that says something like, oh my gosh, you're amazing, or that was awesome. But instead, we need to frame it on here is what really landed so well, or here's what you should focus on specifically so that next time it improves in this way. The third construct is where to next. So once we have achieved our goal, what is the next challenge after that? What is the end result that we're trying to get to? Maybe I want to improve a certain skill or behavior. Maybe my goal is to improve my public speaking, but I have a bigger end goal in mind of where I want that to take me. What is it that I have to build towards as an employee? Feedback based on knowledge, skills, or task is the most readily impactful for people when they know specifically what they can improve upon. And that kind of feedback that's based on that self-determination, something that links to something that I care about achieving and really understanding what the impact of that goal is, are the most powerful in terms of enabling my own processing, my improvement, and my mastery of a certain behavior or skill. And so on the flip side of that, if anyone ever comes to you, I mean, this isn't a movie, but I forget what movie it is, but if anyone ever comes to you and says, can I just give you some feedback about something really quickly? That often is a sign that this is going to be a very emotional conversation, and you probably want to avoid it or dig in a little deeper or prepare to ask clarifying questions. But these types of emotional feedback are the conversations or the feedback discussions that have the biggest negative impacts on either party. It can ruin relationships to a certain extent. Feedback once a year for annual performance reviews doesn't work, in my opinion, does not work. And I haven't seen it so far yet. But feedback that is forced once, twice a year, maybe a few times a year, that doesn't work. We can't force people into a scenario where you're saying, please look back over all this time to be able to recall certain things, because our memories can't be trusted and it becomes too emotional for us because we're relying on how we feel about something. And so a question on this notion that I get a lot is, how do we do this better? But how do we improve or remove our annual performance reviews? How do we remove our ratings? How do we make feedback valuable part of the process? And so we're going to look at what that solution is. After Deloitte recognized how much time and money was spent on their annual process, which didn't work and people hated, they wanted to do 2 main things to simplify the process. They wanted to understand and were able to narrow down 2 constructs. And they decided to stop asking so many people to weigh on each employee's performance, but instead asking leaders, managers, and other various people they work with for their input. And they wrote it in valuation questions. So it becomes a process where we're simplifying this annual review and leaning into real-time feedback on very specific moments, presentations, outputs, projects, whatever the case is. So at the end of every quarter or the end of every project, if the projects are more long-term, the managers or the team leaders would answer 4 simple questions, and just these 4. The first 2 being answered on a 5-point Likert scale, the second 2 being asked on a yes or no question. I've presented this to very large organizations, and if they're not ready for it, if you're going from a 7-point or a 5-point scale, sometimes going to a 2-point scale is scary. So taking an approach in the meantime to say, how do we get there? And some immediate ratings that I see or focal points is taking out the long list of competencies, especially if it's one framework across the whole of an organization, but leaning into a 3-point scale, which is improving feedback, improving impact, positive impact, and extraordinary impact. And that's what we're really trying to measure is how impactful is somebody within their role, within their function, within an organization. So here are a few things to keep in mind when, not only for us to give and receive feedback, but when as coaches, as leaders, we're trying to enable other people to be really good at giving and receiving feedback. When giving feedback, ensure that you're focused on the skill, the knowledge, or the behavior, and really try to work on removing the emotion. I will tell you that if it's not something that we're good at, feedback is a skill. It is a muscle that we have to learn how to flex, and we need to learn how to exercise. So I think we need to, in programs or environments at organizations where we're implementing something like this for the first time, we need to be able to give ourselves freedom to get it wrong before we really start to get it right. So there needs to be an expectation that says, okay, nobody does this. I'm not going to hit the nail on the head the very first time, but I'm going to keep trying and I'm going to keep going. It's a habit that takes time to build. The second part here is to make feedback learning focused, which is to say that what is the key takeaway for this person to do better next time? So instead of a year backwards, we want to start looking at the more immediate future and looking forwards. The third tip is to understand context. And we do this by asking questions like, how did you approach delivering the session? What were the outcomes that you wanted to achieve? When I understand this from somebody, my feedback to a member of my team or one of my coworkers or somebody, it could be very different if I understand that maybe they had one day to prepare something versus if I would have assumed they had a week or longer to be able to prepare something. Very different. The fourth tip is to confirm output against expectations. So I'll use me as an example here. If the expectation of the session is to learn how to fuel performance through feedback in real time, did the content of my session address what I set out I was going to address? Did I hit the mark on what you all were expecting to be able to hear about or learn about today? The fifth tip is to share feedback in real time. And the answer to that question, hopefully, I've covered that a few times, but hopefully it's starting to become a bit obvious, is that value of feedback has a diminishing return over time. The longer we wait, the less effective or impactful it is. Additionally, on top of that, if we don't address things in real time and people keep continuing to do a wrong behavior or a difficult behavior over and over again, it's creating strong neural pathways in your brain, and that becomes harder to overcome or the change a lot more difficult. When receiving feedback and coaching other people to receive feedback, there are also a few things to keep in mind. The first one is to focus on skill, knowledge, or behavior. So we want to be really specific about what we are referring to. So again, I'm just going to keep using myself. So to bring this one alive, if the feedback for me today that I get, so there's a colleague of mine on the phone here on the call with us. If the feedback I get is, Caitlin, your presentation today was awesome. Or Caitlin, your presentation wasn't that great. It wasn't as awesome as I had hoped. Instead of accepting or dismissing it, maybe I feel like it could be, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, that's everything I wanted to say. Instead of dismissing it or accepting it, I need to find out what she's trying to tell me. What do you think made it great? What was it that you feel that didn't land well or not make it so great? How did you find the group engagement? How did you find the content that was delivered? What kind of questions were being asked? What was your experience as a participant in the session instead of just my colleague? Well, I shouldn't say just, but except aside from being a wonderful colleague. This then dovetails into understanding the other person's perspective on where they're coming from and what they're trying to tell me. So if she tells me that the session, it just didn't land, Caitlin, I can't say we hit it out of the park on this one. I'd want to know what her recommendation for me would be for next time. So as I start to dig in, ask clarifying questions, I want to really understand, okay, where can I pick it up? Do I need to tell better jokes? Maybe I need to have some more jokes. Is it too long, too short? Do I need a different story arc? Like, what is it that I really need to focus on to make adjustments for? I received, the third tip is to ask for feedback. And early on in my career, I'm sure we can all are on the same page with this. I feel like I know I'm not alone when I tell you this part of my story, but early on in my career, when I was a very young people manager, we all get it right the first time we're managers. It's hard to do. I was managing a team of people, and I thought I was trying my best, putting my best foot forward, trying to say, okay, what does anybody need? And I just felt like I wasn't getting information that I thought was true for people. Like, I wasn't getting the honesty that I was kind of feeling. And everyone was like, things are fine, things are great. And so at the time, even though I knew it probably wasn't true, so my CEO at the time said to me, just keep asking. Do it in a way that makes people feel safe and that you mean it. And part of making people feel safe is having a certain relationship with them where they feel trusted, where we both feel trusted, and there's an openness to parts of conversations, and they're not expecting any kind of retribution. The first time we ask for feedback from people is we're probably not going to get much. If we go into it to say, okay, what did you think of the session? They're like, oh, it was amazing. I thought it was really interesting. And it moves on. I mean, it's nice to hear, but you're not going to get much from it. And so what we want to do as people who are asking for that is to help people learn how to give it themselves. And even if we don't get much, it's okay. Like, just keep asking and keep reinforcing that, because that's what starts to build a culture, is that repetition. So what you want to ask if you're not getting very much is instead be really specific about your question. Instead of me simply saying, hey, how did that go? I would say, how was the delivery of that session? Did the content resonate with you? Did you get something out of it? Did you learn something new? Did you feel that it met expectations on what was intended to be delivered for the session? So to synthesize all of this, how we improve giving and receiving feedback, how we enable other people to improve giving and receiving feedback, is by connecting, clarifying, and practicing. Connect with your people. Frequency and timeliness matters. When we are leading other people to improve their feedback skill, we want to hold them, or we need to hold them accountable for it. And I cannot emphasize enough how important that accountability is. As an employee, if my managers and my leaders really could care less about the quality or the quantity of feedback I receive, then I'm probably not going to do it. But if my manager is asking me at the end of each project, at the end of each quarter, hey, how much feedback have you gotten? How was that experience? And what was that like for you? That changes the level of priority to me. And I want to make sure I have that in place. And follow up with your employees to make sure that they're doing this and they're collecting it from the right people. We don't want them to only ask feedback from the people we know is going to give positive reflections. We want it to come from all areas of the team. The second part of this is to ask clarifying questions. So feedback, we want to try and make it we want to try to remove the emotion as much as possible. And I know it's easier said than done, but it just takes practice. I will say it's okay for us to express how we feel and what impacted us, but we want to be able to convey or understand the why behind that feeling. And the last one is practice. Ask for feedback from others. Listen openly to what they have to say and thank them for their opinions. If you dismiss people, they will not want to come back and share feedback with you again. So just like our parents, our mothers, our grandmothers taught us, thank yous are very important. So we've got a few minutes left, and that brings me to the end of my session. Before we close and open up for questions, I just want to let you know that our company Betterworks, which you can reach at betterworks.com, is hosting an Empower HR Summit. That's December 1st and 2nd. And I will be hosting a session there. We've got some really great panels from different organizations. My session will be on understanding how to link OKRs and goals to performance and compensation decisions. So I just wanted to put that out there in case you're interested to learn or hear more. And on that note, I will open up the last few minutes that we have for questions. I think Stacy, who's on the call with me, is going to help me register. So I hate to have lots of silence while I read through this. But if there's any questions that come up first, I see there's a Q&A section here. Will a copy of the presentation be available for all intents? I believe so. And if not, honestly, reach out to me on LinkedIn and I'll be happy to share it with you. I believe, here's my LinkedIn information. I believe that will be the case, but if for some reason it's not, we'll be happy to share it with you. That's totally okay. Any other questions for anyone before we go? I don't know if Stacy has a volume for audio to be able to speak. Okay. Well, if you think of anything, I don't want to keep you in case it's not. Thank you so much for attending. I really value and appreciate you being here. Please feel free to reach out if there's any follow-up questions or anything you have. I hope you enjoyed the session. I would love to be able to ask you all for feedback on what you thought about it. So I think somewhere, hopefully there's like a feedback or a final Q&A or something, but if you're able to, I would still value what you think. So thank you so much, everyone. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions today.